Hi, everybody, and welcome to the second podcast on the digestive system. In the first video, we took a look at the basic overview of digestion as well as an in-depth look at the mouth and the different roles that the tongue and teeth and saliva play in digestion. In this particular video, we're going to be looking at the role of, let's see here, the upper digestion. So the esophagus, and then we'll wrap up with the stomach. So let's begin with the esophagus. And really, the esophagus doesn't have a really important role. It simply just kind of connects the mouth to the stomach, and food just passes through there as a connector, as kind of a hallway. And when we're talking about that food, we're talking about something called a bolus. It's just a fancy way of saying a ball of food that's kind of been compacted and smushed together by your tongue and your teeth and your saliva. However, there's a problem that arises with swallowing and getting the food into your esophagus, and that's because food and air both share a common opening, and that opening is called the pharynx, right down there. And so at that point, there's kind of a fork in the road. Let's see if I can get my cursor on it here. Food can either go down there or there, and hopefully it goes down the latter. Hopefully it goes on the esophagus rather than trachea. Trachea is for air, for your lungs. And so the solution actually is pretty easy, and the bolus helps in this solution. What it does is as it goes down, it pushes on a little structure called the epiglottis. And so let's see if I can get my cursor on that one. There's our epiglottis. And so that bolus just pushes down on the epiglottis. The epiglottis seals off the trachea so no food can go down that path. And so then the food goes straight down into the stomach. It moves down the esophagus through a series of smooth muscle contractions called peristalsis. And that takes only about 5 to 10 seconds. As soon as the bolus passes the epiglottis then raises back up, as you see in this far picture, and then you can resume breathing. So it's just a momentary shut off of your breathing so that you can swallow. So, as I'd mentioned, the esophagus is just kind of a hallway, a connector, and peristalsis moves food down, but there are two sphincters that help regulate things and keep things that are supposed to be in the esophagus in there and things that aren't out. And the upper one, the upper sphincter, is called the upper esophageal sphincter. Makes sense. And that prevents air from getting in. And so if we have an upper sphincter, we'll have a lower sphincter. And so the LES prevents the backflow of stomach acid. And unfortunately, if this sphincter is not working very well, if it's a little loose and stomach acid does creep back up there, we get a really nasty case of heartburn. And if it's severe enough, we actually call it GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease. And your esophagus is not meant to handle the stomach acid and the pH of that, and so you can get some damage under your esophagus if that sphincter isn't doing its job. So let's add to the diagram. That's the esophagus, the hallway for peristalsis to move food down, and remember it's regulated through sphincters, and don't forget about the esophagus and that swallowing mechanism. Now on to the stomach. So to orient yourself here, we just did the esophagus. This down here would be the lower esophageal sphincter. And there are 3 regions in the stomach. The top region is called the fundus. And the middle region is called the body. You can see here there are layers of muscles in different directions to help with mechanical digestion. And then the last part of the stomach is the pylorus, and that's where food kind of waits until, can't find my cursor. That's where food kind of waits, and it's no longer a bolus. It's known as this soupy mixture of gastric juices and food called chyme. And it's waiting to be released into the small intestine, the duodenum, and the pyloric sphincter is right there to kind of regulate that. But what I want to show you is what an actual picture of all this stuff, the internal lining of the stomach. It's pretty neat. This is what it looks like, and you'll notice those wrinkles, and those wrinkles are called rugae. And it's pretty cool because they literally do allow for the stomach to expand. So say you ate a really big meal, you have those wrinkles built in to allow the stomach to stretch and hold the contents of the food. But what's also pretty special and necessary is a thick lining of mucus on the top layer of the stomach called the gastric mucosa. And if it weren't for that, this lining of your stomach would get eaten away not only by the acid in your stomach, but also by some of the other gastric juices. So let me show you what that all entails. So these gastric glands. So I said the stomach does mechanical digestion with all those muscles and grinding and churning, but there's lots of digestion going on. First of all, there's hydrochloric acid. Hydrochloric acid is not only part of your immune system to disinfect, but it's going to start breaking cells apart, and it's going to activate something called pepsin. And pepsin is a chemical that's produced in our stomach, and it's used to break down proteins in the foods that we eat. And finally, gastric lipases is a enzyme used to break down lipids in the stomach, also known as fats. So depending on what you eat, these gastric glands can be triggered to start producing their gastric juices at just the mere sight of all this food. And that's a psychological state where you're just triggered to produce these juices by looking at foods. In fact, there's a gastric state where these gastric juices are produced when food actually does enter the stomach. So there's a psychological and there's an actual gastric phase when these juices are produced. Now, depending on how long or what you eat depends on how long it stays in your stomach. But you can see proteins are at the very top with 3 to 4 hours, and carbs are the fastest to move through. Now, what I want to do is focus on this guy a little bit more detail. So, my question is this. We know that the stomach is made out of protein. All of our organs are. So why doesn't the stomach digest itself? It produces pepsin, and pepsin breaks down protein. Well, the biggest reason we already mentioned is that gastric mucosa. The top of that stomach is lined so that it doesn't get eaten away by pepsin or by hydrochloric acid. But, let me just get rid of this for a second. That gastric mucosa only protects this top layer. It doesn't protect all the other layers of the stomach. So what you can see here are these deep pits where these gastric juices are made. So if we zoom in on one of those pits, those gastric pits, we have different types of cells. And one type of cell produces pepsinogen. Now pepsinogen, a long word, but really all it is the inactive form of pepsin. So pepsinogen is produced way down here. And then it slowly works its way up to the surface. And when it gets to the surface, it unites with hydrochloric acid. And hydrochloric acid activates pepsin. So there are two safety features in your stomach to help prevent it from digesting itself. Not only is there the thick gastric mucosa on the surface, but gastric enzymes are produced in inactive forms and then activated when they're found in the proper location. All right. And lastly, I just mentioned the stomach has been made in a very genius way, but ulcers can occur. The lining of the stomach can be eaten away. But for a long time, we just thought it was maybe due to stress or due to diet, when in fact, some people earned a Nobel Prize not too long ago and actually found out that ulcers were caused by a bacteria called H. pylori. And so oftentimes if people have severe ulcers, they're given antibiotics because that's what stops the growth of bacteria. Now, that's not to say that stress and diet don't make ulcers worse, but we know for sure that they are not the true cause of ulcers. So that wraps up the anatomy and physiology of the esophagus and stomach. So make sure you go ahead and add those functions onto your diagram. So we have the hydrochloric acid, which is going to kill germs. Storage food breaks up food mechanically and chemically, specifically with pepsin and those gastric lipases. And thanks for listening.